Hello everyone, welcome back to the Overseers. I'm Proilios and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing, and in this episode we'll be previewing the Shanghai Dragons roster going into Season 5 of the Overwatch League. Um, Before we begin guys, remember if you like our analyses, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you're notified whenever we post any Overseers videos. And just stay up to date with whatever's going on in the scene. And we'll be following our usual format for this episode, going through the thanks, then the DPS, then the supports, and then the coaching staff before sharing our final thoughts on the team as a whole. So let's kick things off. Nightwing, do you quickly want to give us your initial thoughts on the Dragons roster? Because they they know that what they had last year already works wonders. Obviously, because they won the previous season. So, any reactions to the kind of lack of changes that they've made, or yeah, just anything? Go on.
So when a team generally just sort of rests on their laurels, I think it's usually a bit concerning. But with the Shanghai Dragons, I think that's really not a concern this season because I think uh, the players that they do have are genuinely very, very good, almost exceptional on their role, and I don't really see why you would want to get rid of almost any of them off the main roster that played last season. So I think it's completely understandable that they've kept every one of those players. They've added one piece, and they've also retained one piece, which I think is relatively questionable. But generally, I think the Shanghai roster is still well equipped to go into next season and perform quite well. Uh, and honestly, they could just go for that back-to-back championship. Uh, because I do generally think that their roster is still incredibly strong. So, what do you think?
Yeah, naturally, with the Dragons being kind of the first team to seem like a complete hive mind in the Overwatch League, um, the kind of gameplay that they put up last year was extraordinary. Like even when we watched the San Francisco Shock playing in seasons 2 and 3, uh, like yes, they were like just miles beyond any other team in terms of coordination, but the Shanghai Dragons kind of made it seem like teamwork came naturally to them. It didn't seem rehearsed, if you know what I mean. They all just knew exactly what they had to do, and they just did it and reacted to what their teammates were doing at the right time. So I think that's going to work really well, especially going into a completely different game, because I do think Overwatch 2 is going to be leaps and bounds ahead of um, like what Overwatch is at the moment, and improved in certain ways, hopefully. So I think that the Dragons will have an inherent advantage just because of how well they understand each other and each other's play styles already, and can already communicate really well with each other. So I think on that note, let's kick things off with their tank line then, which remains unchanged from last year. So they've got Fate and Void, and I'll let you go first, Nightwing. What are your thoughts on these two tank players?
Right. So, my thoughts on Fate, I think, along with many other people last season, kind of varied throughout the season. I think I started off by questioning their inclusion of Fate a little bit because a lot of the time the ball players they were trying in the beginning didn't really seem to be working that well and didn't really seem to be up to the caliber of the Shanghai Dragons. But as time went on and they perfected that comp, you could see that Fate definitely was exceptional on that ball and definitely the best ball that we had last season. They also did quite well on the other comps that they did sort of swap off to at times, but that ball play, I mean, man, that was a treat to watch by the end of the season. To the point where it was so good that people were kind of getting sick of how good it was because they would just turn some matches into snooze fest because you would know Shanghai would just come out on top. Uh, so yeah, exceptional ball play from Fate. The other main tanks he didn't show that much last season, but when he did show up with them, he did play them really well as well. So I think Fate is also like really well equipped to uh, like pick up any tanks that show up in Overwatch 2, because he has shown that he has a lot of flexibility and mechanical mastery as well, which I think uh, will really help him. I think even if like Fate has to go to the the Doom or something, now that it's been announced that Doom has to is going to be a tank, you might generally just consider Fate instead of putting a DPS player in. I think that's an option for the Shanghai Dragons. Um, I think similar thoughts on Void. Void obviously being an off tank master with just an exceptional uh, Diva and an exceptional Sigma. Uh, he is another major hard carry for this team, which is almost comical to say because everyone seems like a hard carry on this team. Uh, but Void is just incredible. I mean, he is the best off tank, in my opinion, in the Overwatch League right now. And obviously, that role will be scrapped and it'll just be the tank role. But I think Void is going to be integral to how the Shanghai Dragons work, and he's going to be a key part of their success in the at least the early half of this next season. Because from the reports that are coming out as of late about the Overwatch 2 Alpha, players are defaulting to playing that Diva and Zarya because they do seem to be the strongest at the moment. And if that's the case, I think Void is going to be leaps and bounds ahead of many other tanks uh, because he is just elite on that Diva, especially. So I think in terms of the tank line, Shanghai Dragons definitely do have a leg up on the rest of the APAC region, at least. Uh, so I think they're in just a really good position in that sense.
Yep, I completely agree with you about Void. Even I believe he is a top tier off tank player, and even though he wasn't talked about a lot last year, he was a true silent carry because I feel like his discipline and probably even his humility as a player helped him enable his team to great success. And I say humility because he didn't try to be the hero all the time despite having the mechanical skills to just pop off all the time. He understood that his team needed a different playstyle from him and just followed that. Um, his decision making, positioning, mechanics, they're all god tier, and I'm sure he's going to be like a top 10 tank going into Overwatch 2, although he could very well be a top 5 as well. Um, just to talk about Fate as well, even though like a lot of analysts are really high on him, I think he's like I don't rate him as highly as the others, right? Because I feel like the reason he seemed so impressive in season 4 was that his team just followed up on all his engages. That's simply it. I think like I'm not saying he's a bad player, but I feel like if you put him on any other team, he will lose a lot of value. He's just on the right team at the right time, in my opinion. Um, on the on the bright side, I feel like he is a very coachable uh, and like a talented player in that sense because he's also a great leader and a shot caller. And like with Moon signing him and just like knowing that he can coach this play and mold him into exactly what this team needs, he has just struck gold. And I think Fate became so pivotal in setting up plays for the Dragons last year that I'm I'm interested to see how well the Dragons will coordinate when he is not like the fielded tank, right? Like what happens when Fate is on the bench and Void is the solo tank? Do they coordinate equally well, or does Void just like not have that level of just not have that voice that Fate does and can't lead his team that well? We'll just have to wait and watch. But all in all, I think this is still a really good tank line, and I am expecting great things from them this year. Any further thoughts on this, Nightwing?
Yeah, I don't really know who manages the shot calling on the tank side. I think LeeJaeGon is quite vocal as far as I know on the Shanghai Dragons shot calling system, if I remember correctly. But apart from that, I'm not really sure how the communication and the coordination is handled in terms of the tanks. That said, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Void or Fate are able to create that space on their own instead of, kind of piggybacking off of each other. But that's a problem that I think basically every tank player will have to go through. I think they have the right coaching to be able to pull that off compared to many other teams. So they should still be in a comfortable spot in that sense. I feel.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. I think let's talk about the DPS next. Starting off with Fleta, season 3 MVP. Um, and I think Fleta is like a true embodiment of the term flex DPS. And let's face it, he's a hyper flex, right? He can play hit scan heroes, projectile heroes, flankers, just about anything. Like there's no hero this guy can't pick up, and he's just a really solid and reliable DPS player, and is a great fit for the Dragons lineup. So just fantastic to have him for the third year in a row in a team that already knows how to utilize him well. Uh, and like he's obviously partnered up with the other starting DPS for the team, Lip, who is possibly a top 5 hitscan DPS going into Overwatch 2. I feel he is one of the best Sombra players to have ever touched the Overwatch League, because I feel like obviously the results speak for themselves, as well as the stats. But unlike most other Sombra players, Lip has two key playstyles that he switches between based on the situation. He either goes for like smart hack based plays that his team can easily capitalize on, or he just focuses on farming EMPs quickly and then lands fat ults and that get his team free fight wins. And like not a lot of Sombras have that adaptability. They just kind of have a specific mindset that they follow, and naturally like try to lean towards what their coaches have told them to do. But Lip is just so smart at switching between these playstyles that it just like makes everything seem like really smooth for the team. And yeah, I think Lip also played a ton of Ash last year when his team was playing poke comps. And like one thing that's very different about him in Ash's context is that he doesn't worry too much about sniping enemies. He just focuses on landing his shots very accurately, like farms up Bob really fast, utilizes his abilities in the right way, and yeah, I think in terms of Ash play, he's one of my favorites to watch, and I'm just very excited to see him going into season 5 as well. What would you like to share about these two players, Nightwing?
Yeah, so I think for Overwatch 2, one of the main things that you need for your team to succeed, apart from a really good tank, obviously, is just a hyper flex DPS who can play everything under the sun, especially with even more new heroes coming in. You need someone that has so much game knowledge and so much experience playing many different play styles that you can easily adjust to any sort of upcoming changes, which will be happening very often in the new game. So I think in that sense, Fleta is one of the most well placed players to fill that role because I mean this guy can play everything and he can play it exceptionally well. Uh, Tracer, hit scan, uh, Echo, whatever you want out of Fleta, he's got it, and that's why he was the MVP in season 3, obviously, and also still a contender in season 4 as well. Uh, just because he's just that good, and he keeps improving every year, year after year. So Shanghai have really just struck gold on that one by keeping him on the roster. Um, Lip as well, exceptional hit scan play, exceptional Sombra play. I think statistically speaking, he is the best Ash, if I remember correctly, by like multiple parameters uh, as of last season. So yeah, exceptional Ash play from him. Uh, I think that dichotomy that you talked about, his Sombra play style, uh, it's sort of split into two parts, but he switches between those two play styles so very well. Uh, he managed that aggression and the stealth parts of Sombra like really well. I remember that iconic play where he just EMPs Afara and Mercy out of the sky. I mean that was crazy. Uh, I think Lip plays Sombra sort of like many Tracer players play like a really aggro Tracer. He manages to find that same value on Sombra at times, which is just crazy considering how fewer damage per shot Sombra does. So I think these two DPS are just absolutely cracked. What do you think about the remaining DPS that the Shanghai Dragons have still kept on their roster, Prolis?
So yeah, the Shanghai Dragons have retained WhoRU, who was a like really well-known player back from his time with Philadelphia Fusion's academy team. I forget the name. Fusion University. There it is. And after that, he after Fusion Uni and like finding a lot of success there, he had joined the NYXL for a while. Then he joined the Dragons roster, and all in all, he is a very proficient flanker player. And he hasn't had a stable starting spot in the Overwatch League yet, but with more heroes releasing for Overwatch 2 in the DPS category, I feel like he's going to get more chances to showcase his talents. And I feel like with Moon's guidance, he will be very competitive this year. Because I feel like Moon like has got a knack for identifying really coachable talent. Like case in point with Fate, and like I don't think anybody would have kept WhoRU as like let alone Moon, um, if they didn't think that he had the potential to like really go far in the league. And like I think that he just needs to get a chance and a starting spot, because when he had a starting spot back in Fusion University, he just pounded. But when he was brought into the NYXL, for example, he was like sharing the flex DPS role with, like with Haksal and Libero, which is crazy, right? And even when you're on the Dragons, like you're competing with Fleta, who is like Fleta is the meta, right? So there's no real chance for you to make an appearance. But if you can pick up some of these new heroes and let Fleta kind of like be the original guard for the team, that might work out in your favor. So I see where the Dragon strategy like stems from with this, but we'll see. What are your thoughts on Who Are You, Nightwing?
I think on one hand you have to look at who are you's past performances in the Overwatch League, and say that they haven't really been exceptional a lot of the time. They've been okay at best. Really not sort of living up to that same standard that he promised in Contenders. Uh, because he did look exceptional on Fusion University and played really, really well. But once he came into the Overwatch League, it really wasn't, all that exceptional. Uh, Even the few matches that he did play for the Shanghai Dragons near the tail end of the season didn't really look that impressive. It just looked like Shanghai were just memeing on the enemy team by putting in their B team, uh, their bench players such as Molly and WhoRU. I think WhoRU does have another shot this season to prove himself. And I think he will get that chance because this is a player that also has a fairly wide hero pool. He can play just a very wide breadth of heroes. And I think that may be something that would work to the Shanghai Dragons' advantage because they've got their bases covered by having three sort of players that have very, very wide hero pools, especially Fleta and WhoRU. So with the new heroes coming in for Overwatch 2, uh, and with the many balance changes, it's going to take some amount of effort from each DPS player to relearn how many of these heroes work, and how they work within sort of the new sort of playstyles you have to adopt with them. So I think in that sense, WhoRU is a good addition to still keep on the roster. And I think for any of the newer heroes, you may just default to him, similar to how some other teams might default to a player like Rascal in the past when new heroes would come out. So I think WhoRU can sort of fill that similar niche in terms of picking up new things and sort of executing them quite well. But I think for mainstay sort of heroes like the Tracer or the hit scans, you'll just see Fleta and Lipin.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page about that as well. Um, I I was just thinking while you were talking, Nightwing, and I feel like there might be a slight chance that Moon actually uses Who Are You for the current Overwatch roster, because like I think Fleta, he's really good at picking up new heroes as well, and probably like because of how like he's a hyperflex essentially, right? He might be the one Moon wants to pick up new heroes, because he just has like a stronger skill set and a wider skill set than Who Are You. It's just a possibility. I'm just speculating, but it 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 could go either way essentially. It just depends on what Moon thinks is right. So Yeah, any more comments on that, or should we move on to the supports?
Yeah, I mean, it could really go either way, and it's probably going to be somewhere in between. Obviously, you'd probably hand off some heroes to Fleta, some heroes to WhoRU, see which one is working better on which hero in scrims, and then sort of figure out whatever works best for you. But it is good that they've kept one more player, because it's hard to really cover all those new heroes coming in with just two DPS players, right? Where you have to maintain your original level of play alongside picking up new mechanics, new playstyles, new heroes. So in that sense, I think it's good that they've got a very well-rounded DPS roster.
Yep. Alright, guys, let's move on to the supports. And let's start off with LeeJaeGon, who is a true legend among main supports, I will say. He plays all three main support heroes to a really high level. And just to briefly touch upon why he's so great at the game, let's firstly go over his Lucio, which is probably his most iconic hero. And I believe LeeJaeGon is probably the most mechanically skilled and aggressive Lucio in the league. Uh, I think Funny Astro is like right up there as well. But like with LeeJaeGon, it's a little bit funnier because Coach Moon sometimes gives him free reign to go like full Reddit mode and take 1v1s or go for risky boop kills. And even though he feeds sometimes, it mostly works out for the team. Then we've also seen like his break play be really solid. Even though once again sometimes he just feeds on her, but like it works out 90% of times. And like his mercy play is also really good because he pockets the right players, but doesn't overlook opportunities to secure easy kills on low health opponents. Like you will see some mercies that are just they just want to stay away from the pistol, right? They just want to focus on the staff and beaming their teammates. But being opportunistic like this, and especially at the right time, works out really well for LeeJaeGon. So that's why I am a really big fan of his, and I think he's going to be very good at just like learning, like perfecting the new versions of Lucio, Mercy, and Brig going into Overwatch 2. What are your thoughts on him, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Lijiang Tower is sometimes called LeeJaeGon Tower. It's because he is incredibly skilled on that Lucio, and you saw that in that iconic match. Uh, I don't even remember which team it was, because it was
Soul
just
Dynasty.
the Shanghai Dragon. It was just the Shanghai Dragons show the entire time, and it was the LeeJaeGon show, because you would just get boop after boop. Um, but obviously, in regular play as well, where you're not just throwing people off the map, he's incredibly consistent in terms of how often he finds these opportunities to just absolutely demolish the enemy player's mental by 1v1ing them as Lucio of all heroes, and straight up beating them. I think he's incredibly skilled with the kind of whip shots you have to hit as Brig, where many other teams have to default to some of their hit scan players or their other mechanically talented players to hit those whip shots. But LeeJaeGon can just do it himself, because he's just that skilled mechanically, and obviously positionally as well. That's how he pulls off such good plays on the Mercy as well, pocketing the right people at the right time, and like you said, pulling out that mercy Glock and just shooting people in the face when they don't expect it. Uh, he works incredibly well with the rest of the team. I think sometimes sort of the play that's required to peel for your support alone when you're in sort of a ball comp that is a little bit vulnerable to your backline getting dove on, because it's a little hard to peel on that comp, especially when you play that same comp almost the entire season long. LeeJaeGon kept IZaYaKI up through the entire thing, and the Shanghai Dragons did really, really well without their backline being a weakness because of that comp. And I think a lot of that has to be attributed to LeeJaeGon's really good peel and coordination with IZaYaKI in that backline. So I think, yeah, LeeJaeGon is just a goat on the main support role. He's up there with arguably only Moth that I can think of, and maybe Funny Astro as probably the top three like main supports of the league of all time. So I think and this season is probably not going to be very different. Uh, I'm excited to see if LeeJaeGon actually picks up another hero to add to his repertoire and show his stuff on something new as well. But that really just depends on the developer gods and what they decide to add to Overwatch 2, I guess. But yeah, uh, what do you have to say about IZaYaKI? Or do you have any other comments about LeeJaeGon?
No, I think you pretty much covered all the points that I didn't talk about with LeeJaeGon. Um, Izayaki, well, he's a really strong, aggressive flex support, kind of similar to Shu, right? And Izayaki, he has an absolute like god tier Ana and Zen. Like on Ana, like you have to see him like playing when his team does not need healing. Like he just you know how Ana players, like top tier Ana players, generally just focus on repositioning when their team does not need that much healing. This guy will just like point his like position his crosshair in the right place and like focus on dealing damage. He will not bother about like strafing or positioning here and there because he just knows his aim is that good and he'll just like finish off low health targets on Ana, and I don't know, he's just a madman like that, and he's also like crazy accurate with his volleys on Zen, which is like he often gets solo picks to open fights, which I think is like a really common thing between him and Ultraviolet from the Atlanta Rain. Their volleys are just some of the best you'll see in the scene, and yeah, I mean, he's going to just be absolutely amazing going into season 5 for sure. Not much more to say about him. Your turn now, Nightwing. Go on.
Yeah, so IZaYaKI is one of the best flex supports we have, uh, despite it being an extremely, extremely competitive role. Obviously, we do have some of like I think some of the only people competing with IZaYaKI at the moment are Violet and Twilight and Shu. I think are the only people that I would even consider putting above IZaYaKI at the moment. I think um, because he is actually just cracked. Does sort of struggle. As far as I know, he did sort of struggle to communicate with the rest of his team on the Valiant uh, when he was on that roster because he wasn't really able to communicate callouts properly. He wasn't able to communicate what he sort of wanted out of the team. But now that he's on Shanghai, I think his comms have gone up and he's able to really show his stuff. Because even back on the Valiant, you would see that uh, IZaYaKI would get these crazy headshots at absolutely random times when he was playing the Zen. Uh, out of like spots where you would never expect Zen to actually be able to get a kill. Because he's mechanically really really strong, and he does like you said, he does get away with poor positioning sometimes. Even though he does actually have really solid positioning, he can take those aggro angles because he can get away with it. He just has that much confidence in himself and in his team. Um, so I think that's going to be something that really helps him out in Overwatch 2 when he's picking up possibly new heroes and just picking up newer playstyles. Currently, it seems like as far as people are talking about the alpha right now, it seems like it's going to be some sort of super dive. Uh, but obviously, future balance patches might change that. If it's just an incredibly fast meta, I think IZaYaKI will still be able to pull that off because he doesn't really get caught off guard because he's just that mechanically and reflexively quick. So I think the backline is in an absolutely fantastic position for the uh, Shanghai Dragons for these two mainstay supports. Uh, and obviously, they've added one more piece. Would you like to talk about that piece, Prolas?
Sure. So, the Shanghai Dragons have signed BeBe as a second flex support this season, which is a confusing signing because BeBe wasn't that competitive last year. Like, I feel like it's fine if he's just signed as a backup, which is probably the case, like just to cover the team in a double flex support meta. Because as far as I know, LeeJaeGon doesn't really play flex support. He had played like Zen, I think, on Elios well one time or something like that. But other than that, yeah, if you're playing double flex support, it's okay to have a backup like BeBe. But yeah, I mean, last year when we were reviewing the Washington Justice, which was BeBe's previous team, we had mentioned like that he's probably one of the worst flex supports going into the season. But he wasn't as tragic like as I'd expected him to be. I actually liked his BAP play in some places during the season, especially his use of amp matrices, which were like they were mostly defensive compared to like these DPS oriented uh, matrices that are used. But that's okay. And his Moira wasn't bad either, so I think it's going to be fine. And yeah, I mean it's okay. And I think signing him as a backup also means that he's probably come at a low salary. So that's just speculative, but it'll work to the Dragons' advantage in case they feel like they want to pick up another tank, for example, because they currently just have two tanks and might want someone, you know, whom they are impressed by after scouting mid season. So, yeah, I think you can share your thoughts on BeBe as well now, Nightwing.
I think BeBe definitely had, you know, a long ways to go last season, and you saw that he was sort of imitating IZaYaKI in the sense that he would also be out of position, but in that sense, it would be not because of his confidence, but just because of poor coaching. Uh, as we talked about in our Washington Justice episode, I think it's just hard to really, uh, show your stuff when your team is all over the place as well. That said, I do agree with you that BeBe is mostly just a backup. I think for a possible double flex support meta. Uh, where just supports are completely focused on dealing damage and not so much on position or pocketing. And I think that's really where you'll see BeBe come in. uh, if you see sort of his VODs from last season and compare them to someone like Shu or IZaYaKI even, you'll see that his mechanics are not really all there. His positioning is not really all there. He's not really landing that many antis as compared to other Ana players. His lamps are a little bit off on BAP, relatively speaking, to other players. Uh, and he's not really using those BAP windows as aggressively or as selfishly. Um, just seems to be sort of stuck in the middle, not really sure what to do. And I think part of that is just the fault of coaching. But as an individual player, you should have, some idea of what to do. But BeBe really did not uh, have those sort of individual pop-off moments a lot of the time. And I'm hoping that changes a little bit when he is fielded this season. But uh, if the Shanghai backbench is given the sort of treatment they were last season, then I don't think you'll really see anything come out of BeBe this season. Similar to how you didn't really see much from Molly last season, though I do think Molly is probably a higher caliber player than BeBe. And that's why he's a starter on the Guangzhou Charge now. So yeah, that's uh, that's all the players, I think. Any other thoughts, Prelius?
No, I think we've covered all of our thoughts at the moment. Um, let's move on to the coaching stuff then, which is like quite a quite a doozy because I think the Dragons probably have the most number of coaches, right? Um, you mentioned earlier they had something like 10 staff members, including four coaches. So yeah, I think let's talk about head coach Moon first because he's kind of like the head of the circus, going strong into his third year with the Dragons. And I'm sure he's going to be one of the smarter coaches in Overwatch too because of his knack for figuring out how to counter the meta. Because I suspect there will be a very hard set meta when the league begins because balance will be all over the place and some characters will just be OP. And Moon will either just help his team master the meta or with like he will just counter the meta, which is more likely. So yeah, I'm expecting great things from him once again. What about you, Nightwing?
Yeah, I have no idea what the meta in Overwatch 2 will be. I'm expecting it might even just change week to week as teams figure out uh, what to do. There are so many matches happening throughout the season, and teams are getting enough breaks that I think coaching will actually play a good part. in it, because many teams will have to innovate during those sort of times off. Um, you'll have sort of many breaks where you'll have sort of just time to experiment in scrims. And I think a good sign of coaching is if your team is able to beat the meta or find the meta uh, before any other team and really implement it really well. I think that's something that Moon will make sure the Shanghai Dragons do, similar to what they did last season when people found out almost till the tail end that the ball meta that the Shanghai Dragons were playing was the right play all along. Uh, because with the other comps, you were just not able to execute as hard or get, picks as quickly or set up positioning as quickly as with that ball comp. So I think in that sense, the Shanghai Dragons are incredibly well placed to come into Overwatch 2. Obviously, this is speculative because Overwatch 2 is going to function very differently from the way that Overwatch 1 has functioned, just due to the nature of 5v5 and the changes in balance, lack of CC, etc. But I think honestly that the Shanghai Dragons will be able to pull it off. And that's why, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I think they can probably even go for the two-peat, where there are not that many teams that will really contend with them, just because of how incredibly high the skill level of all their players is, at least the mainstay players on their roster. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to say. I don't really have much to say about the assistant coaches in particular. They have, got Daemin and Pavane. Uh, I think Daemin has coached Guangzhou Charge and Element Mystic before as well. And he was also a player on the original Shanghai Dragons, right? Um,
Hmm.
so, I'm still a bit curious about what Daemin really provides. Not really sure how to get information on that, considering, it's a different language. It's hard to really access information about them. Uh, that said, I do have my like full faith in this Shanghai Dragons coaching staff. I think they'll be able to execute uh, whatever goals they set out for themselves this year.
Yeah, with like such a diverse team of assistant coaches with different backgrounds and different experiences, there's bound to be a lot of support provided to Moon, especially considering that he has worked with Kong, like assistant coach Kong, for a year now, and even with Daemin for a few months, because like Daemin joined, I think, during, uh, like right before the season 4 playoffs began. So he still had like half a year with the Dragons, not even half a year, more than that. And they've also got Pavane, like he was the NYXL's coach in season 1, then with the London Spitfire for a year. So he's got like a lot of experience with both success and failure. And he like retired and is now with the Dragons. So like a completely mixed bag of assistant coaches. And I hope that this is a case of many hands make light work rather than too many cooks spoil the broth. So it just remains to be seen how this kind of changes the Dragons' approach and playstyle going into season 5. Um, but I think let's quickly share our thoughts on where we think the Dragons will rank among the other teams. Like just a rough estimate, Nightwing. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with what I've said before. I think Shanghai Dragons is probably going to go for that two-peat. Honestly, I think they're going to be one of the most competitive teams, probably top three at least. I think this season, despite how strong other teams might look, I think they're going to be top three. They're definitely going to come into the finals for many of the sort of mid-season tournaments. Including the international one, not just the regional ones. I think they're going to be just a formidable team to be reckoned with. Uh, I think there are very few teams that are at the level of the Shanghai Dragons.
Yep, and I completely agree with that because if you look at like each of the individual roles, like the tank line is really good, the DPS line is formidable, the supports like they've got like LeeJaeGon who's possibly like the most well-rounded and mechanically skilled main support going into season 5. IZaYaKI is just an absolute nut. They have backup for double flex support metas with um, BeBe, so they really do have a lot of bases covered, and like I think it's not unrealistic to think that they might even complete a second season win in a row and just um, like match the San Francisco Shock's record of doing that. So I think worst case would be um, like if BeBe ends up being fielded in a double flex support meta and he isn't able to perform well. But like that's the only scenario in which I think the Dragons will really fail. But other than that, it's a really great lineup, so I'm expecting great things. Any more thoughts to share on the Dragons Nightwing, or can we close this episode?
I think there are only about three teams that are extremely well equipped to succeed in a double flex support meta at the moment. It's the Shock with Violet and Finn. It's probably Shu and Skewed on the Gladiators, and possibly Chengdu Hunters with Faraway and Monk. I don't think other teams are really that well equipped to deal with double flex support. So I think Shanghai might still hang in there with decent coaching, even if double flex support meta is in place. But that's definitely one of the possible weaknesses. The other weaknesses I can see cropping up are just, again, that coordination issue. If Fate or Void has to play and the communication system is disrupted because of that, uh, compared to what they did for Overwatch 1. But that really depends on them not being able to integrate a new communication structure at all, which I think, considering the caliber of the coaching staff, they should be able to pull that off, honestly. But if they're not able to do, then that could be, a potential spot of weakness. But that's something that every single team will have to work out for themselves. Just because, going into 5v5, the structure will have to be a little bit different. The playstyles will have to be different compared to 6v6. So, yeah, I think Shanghai Dragons are still incredibly well placed to do really well this year.
All right, and on that note, we can round off this episode. Thanks to everyone who's been listening so far, and do remember to do all the YouTube stuff like comment, subscribe, share, and help us make even greater content with your feedback. So, thanks a lot once again, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.